The select board. I don't know, Walter, if you want to do the same.
Call to order the meeting of the Advisory Finance Committee.
And I guess, Steve, when they arrive, we'll do the same for you. All right. Yeah. I'll just look for everybody to stand to do the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, with that, Christy, I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thanks. So welcome to the Budget Summit. We hold the Budget Summit every year as a tri-board meeting on the last Thursday of the month, or last Thursday of September. And so the purpose of this is to look at the closeout of fiscal 24, providing some updates to fiscal 25, and then looking ahead to fiscal 26. So the first section of my presentation is on the closeout of fiscal 24. But before I get into my slides, I wanted to welcome Jen Miller to the podium, who is our conservation director, who wants to share some news about one of the things that we discussed at town meeting in March.
Thank you, everyone. So I know there's a lot to cover tonight, so I will keep it really brief. But as part of the fiscal year 24 wrap-up and fiscal year 25 update, Christy had invited me here to share some exciting news with all of you. If many of you might recall, at the Budget Summit last year, we presented a proposal for the Ellis Walker property acquisition, and I'm excited to share that we learned on Monday that the Healy Driscoll administration has funded that award for the Land and Water Conservation Fund grant in the amount of $307,500 toward the acquisition costs. So it's a 50% reimbursement, so that's the amount that we are funded. So it's a total of $615 for the acquisition. So not only was this a federally funded program, which means we were competing nationally with other communities, but we were one of 8 communities in Massachusetts to be selected. So I think we all should be very proud of that. And it's in terms of what this grant means, not only are we preserving another 37 or 35 acres of land here in Westborough for public access and also drinking water supply in this case, climate resiliency, carbon sequestration, could go on and on for the benefits of this property. But I also wanted to just highlight that this grant was truly a collaborative effort. And like many of our grants that we're working on behind the scenes that some of you might not always get to be or hear about, that our department heads and our executive team are working on. We collaborated with other town boards and committees. In this case, we worked with the Open Space Preservation Committee, working with other nonprofits. Again, in this case, we worked with Sudbury Valley trustees, and oftentimes other entities as well. So this one had a match requirement. Sometimes for those match requirements, we look to the general fund. In this case, we were able to kind of be a little bit more creative and look at other resources. And so we were able to seek funding through Sudbury Valley trustees. They funded $200,000 of this acquisition, or will be funding, and then also Walk Up Robinson. They funded not only a portion of the acquisition, but also $25,000 in initial stewardship costs. So just a really exciting project, and I think it kind of highlights all the good things that are happening here in town. It's a really great cause. So thank you all for your support.
Thanks, Jen and team, for all that work on that. It was a good way to kick this off, I think. So as we, well, I guess I should start by saying, so this year, as we started to think about the upcoming budget process and as we were coming off of town meeting, we were just hiring a brand new town accountant and a brand new treasurer collector and a brand new finance director, no chief assessor, and a brand new superintendent. And I thought, what will they do? So we should reinvent the Budget Summit process. So we had some really good meetings with the Advisory Finance Committee, Select Board, to talk about ways that we thought we could better use this Budget Summit. And so I think you'll find that we took all of that feedback and we were able to provide, I think, more information, and certainly always open to additional comments. So as we are closing out fiscal 24, We have not fully closed it out, so we anticipate next week that we will be submitting all of our information to the state, and some of that is the result of all of that changeover that I just mentioned. But we've been working with DOR, and they've committed to working to certify all of our free cash and retained earnings as we go into the October town meeting. So where you see free cash here as well as retained earnings, that is where we have ended at the end of fiscal '24. So that does not represent our free cash at the beginning of fiscal '25. We won't know that till it's certified. It does represent the same numbers that we showed at the annual town meeting, showing the amount of free cash that we drew down from that initial almost $15 million of free cash.
Christy, real quick.
Yep.
Can you go back for a second? The top number has an extra
Can you
digit
speak
in it.
into your microphone?
The top digit on free cash has an extra digit in it. I just wanted to make sure
It's 439.
439,
Yeah.
okay. Thank you.
So here we looked at our revenues. So we've been showing this slide more to show where our revenues are coming from. So as you can see, aside from real and personal property, which is the largest revenue that the town receives, and then state aid, which is that purple, really ambulance receipts, motor vehicle excise, as well as hotel, motel taxes and meals taxes are driving a lot of the revenue that we receive. On this slide, we break it down where we're looking at fiscal '23 compared to fiscal '24. And so, again, these are showing a lot of the same categories that you saw on the previous slide that was represented in the pie chart. One of the things that we want to highlight here was we moved from fiscal '23 to '24. We talk a lot about revenues and how we estimate our revenues and being conservative about our revenues. And I just think it's really important as you look at this that you see both pluses and minuses in that right-hand column, and that's because our revenues can fluctuate year to year. And so as we estimate our revenues, we look at trend data, and we continue to watch our revenues as they come in. This is the same slide that you saw. Again, we have not certified free cash at this point, so this is the same slide that you saw at the annual town meeting showing our use of free cash over the years. And so you can see that we started with almost $15 million of free cash in fiscal '24. We spent about $5.5 million of free cash, so that represented about 37% of our free cash, which is significantly increasing the amount that we are using since fiscal '20, which is represented in this slide. As Jen just highlighted for you, another one of our funding sources that we seek out across departments, both town and school, is any available grant funds. And so we do look at our capital requests and different initiatives that the town has expressed that they're looking for, as well as maintaining our current level of service and identify grants that would support that. And so this shows that in fiscal '24, we did have about $15 million worth of grants. Some of the ones to highlight are the community development. That also includes our very first MassWorks grant, which was the opening of West Park Drive, which we celebrated yesterday. And then also in the fire department, that grant amount includes the grants received for the regional dispatch center. And then in public works, that also includes money that we have received for the Otis Street project. On the right is the ARPA funds. So both the Finance Committee and the Select Board are part of that process. So you can see here how we have, I think, very deliberately have spread that money across all of our departments. And so you can see that the grant award is $5.7 million, though the total awarded is a little bit more than that. And this is just a reminder that we did earn interest on those funds. And so we've been able to allocate that interest as it's grown. So there's about $190,000 remaining in the ARPA funds. As we look forward to fiscal '25 budget estimates, just a reminder that we're about 3 months into fiscal '25. So this represents what we know in this first quarter. But this slide here represents the average single-family tax increase. We like to show that bar in gray, which is what we were estimating at annual meeting in March, which was $835 to the average single-family, based on a change in values, additional revenue that came in. We're currently estimating $696 to the average single family in fiscal '25, and that number will be further refined as we move into our tax classification hearing. This is the same slide showing a percentage increases. We always like to show excess levy capacity. As you can see, we have steadily increased our excess levy capacity since 2019. And we estimated using significantly more excess levy capacity at the annual town meeting. However, given the change in value, we are estimating using about $1.5 million. I think this slide's really important as we look to the last agenda item, which is goal setting for fiscal '26. One of the things that we have talked about in terms of establishing a goal is really being in line with Prop 2.5. So just for folks who may not know, when we grow or don't use our excess levy capacity, we are in line with a community that does not need an override. And if we are to use our excess levy capacity, that would represent, if we were at our levy limit, the need for an override. And so we can talk more about that when you're talking about goal setting. But one of the goals that I know folks in the finance team and select board have talked about is the goal of not using our excess levy capacity. Looking ahead to '26, I think this is where you'll really recognize some of the changes in the information that we're providing at this summit. One of the things I want to stress, and I know our superintendent will stress as well, is that we are very early. We are very, very early. We are very early. And so, so this is based on some trend data. It's based on some assumptions, some things that we do know are coming forward, and it's based on values and revenue that we are currently aware of. So if revenues are anticipated to grow in fiscal '26, we'll revisit that as we develop the budget, as an example. So this is our budget process, same slide that you've seen every year. So we kick off the budget process tonight, and then over the next month or so, we'll receive capital budget requests as well as departmental budget requests. And then in early November, I sit with the finance director and we meet with every one of the department heads, and we go through their budgets, their requests, we look at their use of funds in previous fiscal years, current fiscal years, and identify opportunities for efficiencies, opportunities for potentially cutting, or and then reflecting sort of on the whole budget as we move through those conversations to identify ways that departments might work together, fund things together, different things like that. So I present the budget to all of you on December 21st, and then we move forward with our budget hearing, and then we do have our winter budget summit in this room with several of the department heads. One of the things I wanted to highlight that guides us through this budget process, in addition to just looking at the numbers, is really recognizing what the community has asked of us, and that's articulated, we think, through some of these what we would call guiding documents. And the reason we use these as sort of a guidepost here is because all of these were done through community engagement processes. So strategic plan, master plan in particular, even our community needs assessment, which we've also called our senior needs assessment, reflect surveys, focus groups, community engagement sessions, things that really highlight what the community has asked of us. In addition to those documents, and in addition to just our day-to-day interactions with the community, we have offered, and I think we're growing in our offerings of public engagement opportunities, fiscal '24 up until this point in fiscal '25. So we've held public engagement sessions on many things: the B-Wall, the dog park, the Ellis Walker property acquisition that we just talked about, and certainly the community center. One of the things that's a little bit different, but one of our department heads thought we should highlight, and she's right, is the Civic Leadership Academy. So that's something that this is our second year kicking it off, and we kick it off in September. It's an 8-week course where department heads present to the 15 students. And it's a really great opportunity for us to teach what we do, but then also hear from them, what they're looking for and how they view the community. So we're moving into anticipated impacts. So these next few slides are really things that we know are coming in fiscal 26. So the first slide here is the union contracts. So on the town side, we have 6 unions. The fire department is the only union that is off cycle from the other unions. So we are currently in negotiations with these 5 unions. We often talk at this summit about which unions we're negotiating with. In this slide, we wanted to show you what that reflects in terms of number of employees. So you can see that here. Additionally, things that we talked about as we moved into fiscal 25 and will come up again in 26 are known salary and wage adjustments. So as you know, we did bring on 2 positions in fiscal 25 at a 6-month mark. So the assistant town planner, we funded for 6 months. We actually have an additional funding source in the Affordable Housing Trust. So going forward in fiscal 26, we would fund that position at the full 12 months while we still receive the offset from the Affordable Housing Trust at that 10 hours per week. In the recreation department, we also funded for 6 months a program coordinator, understanding that we would move into the community center, which we did. If you haven't been, we did move the recreation department into the community center, and it was open to the public on Tuesday. It's already getting great use, so please go and take a tour. But we would fully fund that position in fiscal 26. And then the police department, we've talked about this every year since it's been awarded, which is the ARPA funding, which is a one-time revenue source. And so the plan has always been to incrementally move those positions onto the budget. Fiscal 25 is the last year that we can do that under the guidelines with ARPA. And so in fiscal 26, they'll be fully funded on the budget. We also know that we are moving through our OPEB policy, or other post-employment benefits policy, which is, and part of that policy is to get back up to that pre-COVID amount of $1.1 million, moving from the budget into our OPEB trust. We removed that from the insurance budget during COVID, and we've been working to steadily put money back in. And so we're in that 5th year of that plan. And so we know that the insurance budget will go up by $200,000 as a result of just this policy. And this is part of our comprehensive fiscal management policies. We also know that we continue to hold a structural deficit, which is that $450,000 of free cash that we've used the last 2 years to lower the tax rate. We did that for the first time as a result of COVID. We used that $770,000 in the following year, fiscal 22. We had a significant increase in Chapter 70 funds. And so we were able to close that gap. The following year, if you remember, in December, I proposed a budget with a much higher amount. I can't remember what it was than that 471. And then every time we found savings in the budget, or every time something came in better than we had expected, we reduced that use of free cash. And that's why we're at that kind of odd number of the 471, 259. In the next 2 fiscal years, in order to maintain that, and to maintain that about $56 savings to the average single family, we've continued to use that free cash. And so this slide synthesizes all of that into the estimated tax impact. Again, this is based on current values, current revenues. So if we just do that math, it's about $102. If we were to add both of those, those staffing positions fully funded, add in that $200,000 per our policy, which we've continued to follow, and if we were to close that structural deficit. And then looking at budget assumptions, one of the biggest drivers of our budget, which reflects costs on both sides of the street, so school and town, are our fixed costs. And so here you can see sort of the line items of what to make up fixed costs. So we're showing our percent change from fiscal 24 to 25 budget. We went back and looked at the 5-year trend, and then we estimated 26 based on that 5-year trend. Just pointing out that in the insurance budget, we did a 3-year trend, and that was because the numbers are impacted by that year that we reduced the budget by $1.1 million for OPEB. Also with the landfill, just really wanting to point out that we don't anticipate going up this much. We anticipate actually seeing at least being stable, if not a reduction, based on the pay-as-you-throw and some other work that we've done, which we've talked about with these boards. This slide is just reflecting town departments. In fiscal 25, our total salary was just over 18 million. And what we were able to do is calculate out the steps that we anticipate the current employees to have per their contracts or per our salary schedules in fiscal 26, and then we put on top of it a 2.5% COLA. That's based on the fact that the only contract we currently have settled for fiscal 26 reflects a 2.5% COLA, so we used that amount for this assumption. And then again, in looking at expenses, that 7.2%, that's trend data based on the 5-year look back. And then fixed cost, we did that 9.53%, which is reflected on the previous slide, but we also added in the $200,000 for OPEB that I had mentioned before. And then we show about a 7.7% trend increase in enterprise funds. That's inclusive of all enterprise funds. Certainly this is the first year of the stormwater utility, and so that might change going forward. But I did not include that, obviously, in the tax impact because enterprise funds don't have a direct tax impact. And then this is departmental data. So we broke out all the departments, similar to how we do that in the budget. So we just are showing this is the result of a discussion that we had with the Finance Committee, just sort of understanding what 1% of these budgets might look like. So this is showing the total fiscal 25 budgets for each of these groups of departments or single departments if they're larger, 1% of their salary and 1% of their expense budgets, and then 1% of the total budget. Oh, and just the note at the bottom, just want to be clear that that's calculated using general fund only. And I think that's important because a lot of our DPW budget is made up of water and sewer enterprise funds, as well as stormwater at this point. Oops. So looking at some alternative funding sources that we have, in addition to raise and appropriate, we do have some revolving funds on the town side. They actually are reflected in our general bylaws. And so you can see here, revolving funds, as I think you all know, are for very specific purposes. And so you collect fees for these purposes, and then you're able to use them to pay costs for these purposes. So I think most of these you're probably aware of. And these are, again, for very specific purposes and authorized to be expended under these specific positions or committees. We also have reserves. Again, this is end of fiscal 23 because we haven't certified 24, and so. You see this slide often, but just showing that we're within our fiscal management policies related to our reserves. And then other financial resources, we often show the sale of real estate accounts. So that's land that we've sold, open space, Walk Up Robinson, our stabilization, which we added to 2 budget cycles ago. We also have the Pulte stabilization account, which is the money that comes in as part of the decision under the Zoning Board of Appeals to have a payment at each issuance of the certificate of occupancy related to the Pulte development at the state hospital property. So that's about halfway done. So currently we have 3.4 million, and the most recent transfer out of that was to the Affordable Housing Trust. So the way the stabilization fund is restricted is that it's for capital projects to support seniors and also for affordable housing. And then we have a mitigation stabilization fund. That's when we receive mitigation money for certain developments. What's driving that fund, the funding of that fund, has been also related to Pulte. We receive money. There was an agreement when Pulte first came in that required that they build additional affordable housing, or in lieu of that, provide a certain amount of money to the town. That money is very specifically for affordable housing. We didn't have a trust when that agreement was developed. That's why you see on this upcoming town meeting an article to move the money from that mitigation stabilization fund to the Affordable Housing Trust. And then the last one here is our OPEB trust fund, which is 11.8 million. This is our enterprise funds. I won't go through all of them, but just wanted to highlight that we have 4 of them. So sewer, water, stormwater, which again is new, and then the golf club enterprise fund. And similar to the revolving accounts, they pay for specific things. So we receive fees or revenue in for these specific things, and then that money is expended to cover those budgets. So my next slides are on debt and capital planning, but at this point, I'm going to invite Allison up to talk about the schools.
Go ahead. Did you want to convene? Did you want to convene a quorum of the school committee?
And obviously, we do have a quorum, 3 out of 5. I don't think we have anything to say at this point, since Allison will now pick it up from here.
All right, well, thank you very much. This is an exciting way to start off my superintendency here. This is a very early budget cycle, as Christy pointed out. So I do want to say everything here feels very, a little predictive at this point, and we're doing the best we can with the data that we have. I wanted to give a very large thank you to Christy and John, who've been incredibly kind of welcoming and helpful, and in thinking about how to approach this. I looked back at prior years, but also really leaned heavily on kind of their thinking and feedback about what would be helpful. Also on Anita Patel, who can't be here. She's at home recovering from a surgery, but she'll text me if I go off the rails at all, she says. So, all right. I am going to start off the way I started off with the Advisory Finance Committee, kind of talking a little bit about, just taking a moment to talk a little bit about context and what I've noticed and what I believe. And, I have certainly noticed that the citizens here take great pride in their schools. The schools are in a very, very stable place in terms of staffing and materials. Community has invested very substantially in supporting the operating budget as well as capital projects over the last few years. I believe strongly in transparency and careful stewardship. Our overall enrollment has decreased slightly. I'm going to show you some more data on enrollment. And student support needs have increased. So we have an interesting situation where while our overall enrollment has gone down a little bit, we are seeing an uptick in need. We don't see that need going away just yet. So I'll talk more about that as we get in. Okay. I am proposing a level services operating budget. That's not a level funded budget, because to maintain the same services year to year, we have to actually keep up with some costs. Okay. And really, this is the question I'm trying to answer. What would it take to open the doors next year and provide the same high-quality services that the community expects? We need enough staff to meet class size guidelines for projected enrollment. We want to keep our programming strong and stable. We need to meet our contractual obligations for step and lane changes and the COLA increase. We have to negotiate a new transportation contract. I have a slide about that will be exciting. We want to monitor things like utilities, materials, and supplies. Those are actually relatively small parts of our budget. And the drivers kind of work like this. Enrollment, the number of students who show up, and the programming are really the big things that sort of work together, along with special education, our sort of staffing model, service contracts, facilities maintenance, and repair and utilities. Here's what it looks like on the school side. This is FY25. And you can kind of see one of the dilemmas around school budgeting is it's almost all sunk into the people, right? Oftentimes people will talk about ways to save by kind of trimming supplies here and there. Really that's not going to get radical savings. The way we sort of grow or the way we shrink is all through the people. So I want to make sure to really emphasize that. That is how we operate. Anita put this together for me. It's a look back, and I think it goes back to 2016. I'm sorry, the colors aren't coming through really clearly, but you can see these are the operating budget that increases in the general fund. This doesn't include grant funding for us, but the percentage increases. You'll notice a lot happening in that 2.5 to 5 range. Spike up in 2023. That was the year that there was a vote at fall town meeting, so for extra funding because of a need in special education. But you'll also notice kind of clustered over the last 4 years, increased spending on the school side. And I do think some of that is us kind of coming out of the COVID environment, really investing in recovery and repair. Here's a 10-year look back at enrollment. Kind of comment on your enrollment. You know, we are seeing a slight downward trend, but the delta between the highest and lowest actual enrollment are actually those first 2 points on the slide. And it's, you know, just around 200 students, which is not much of a swing in a district this size. Just for context, I was a principal at a middle school, and in my school alone, we had a delta of 200 students during the time I was a principal. So it's not, in this grand scheme of things, 200 students spread out doesn't make a huge difference for us. I want to make a note about those last two numbers. 3848 is where we were as of last week. That has changed. We're up a little bit, and we anticipate being up a little bit more by the time I come back and present again. And 3765 is a very soft number right now. It's based in part on current enrollment. So when we look ahead to next year, what we do is we take sort of kindergarten through 11th grade and sort of, you know, migrate them up a year. We're not factoring in anything sophisticated about kids coming in or going from the district. And then we are using a number of ways to estimate who's coming in kindergarten. I have reached out and developed a partnership, started a partnership with NESDEC, the New England Council of Schools, and they provide some baseline enrollment study data. We'll be looking at that, so that'll be early in the fall. I also am going to recommend a more robust enrollment study to look at long-term trends. A concern I have is that we want to be able to make sure we're taking everything into consideration so that if, particularly given there's an interest in developing more housing in the community, that has implications on the school side. We want to know what those are so we can plan thoughtfully for them. Okay. So after enrollment, one of the bigger drivers in our budget is in the special education department. Fortunately for you all, this is a district that has, it basically has a theory of action around what to do around special education, and that theory seems to be working in two ways. One is for students and their learning, which is the most important way, but also for financial management. So we have highly inclusive programming here. We have strong intervention services. We have staff that are designed to support those things within the schools. And the return on investment is we have a relatively low percentage of students here who are accessing special education services. And among those, a very low percentage of students who are going out of district. And the reason that matters from a financial point of view is what you can see there. The cost of out-of-district tuition is extremely high. The collaboratives, which are sort of your best bet in terms of the financial side, range, and those are per pupil costs. So 68,000 to 73, that's around what it costs for a student to go to a collaborative school. A private day placement can run as high as 171. And when you look at private residential placement, that can be upwards of $250,000 per student. Those numbers do not include transportation, which is another factor. I've included the FY23 and FY24 transportation actuals for out of district. And they also don't include services that are now being billed separately. So the schools that we send kids out to are billing us for one-to-one services for speech and language, for occupational therapy, for psychological services. So those numbers can be very high. There is a state reimbursement program, you're aware of, Circuit Breaker, that helps districts by helping us mitigate the costs of these needs, and they are real needs, and we believe seriously that if a student can't be educated here in the district, we want to make sure we're providing that. However, those reimbursements are provided in arrears, so it makes budgeting really challenging. It's a very volatile part of the budget. Here's the kind of good news. I have two good news slides. So when you look at some area districts, this was a slide that Sherry Stevens, our Director of Student Services, presented a couple years ago in her update to the school board. Westborough, sort of fourth from that side, has done a really nice job meeting students' needs such that they are able to be successful without special education services. So this is percentage of students receiving special ed services in district. And when you look at this, it might cause you to ask yourself, well, what about, what are they doing in Shrewsbury and Hopkinton, and how do we get even there? But I want to show you this slide. This is the most recent data available. I'll update this as soon as the FY24 data is available. This is the percentage of students on IEPs who are going out of district. Westborough is doing an incredible job with this. And I can't tell you enough how important that is financially for the district. So when we talk about our investment in the human side and that sort of large percentage of our budget that goes towards staffing, that staffing is doing something important that allows us to sort of really both keep kids here in their neighborhood and in their schools, provide them a more inclusive education, and it saves money. So this is a kind of bad news slide, so I apologize. So one of the things we are anticipating is a little bit of excitement around the transportation budget. So I've included the numbers that we had negotiated for our last round of transportation budget. That was a 3-year contract, and those were the increases over those 3 years, 7.3, 3.07, and 3.34. And recently, Anita, on an email and a call with some areas, districts who had gone out prior to renegotiate their transportation contracts, those are the kind of numbers we were seeing. I'm really hoping Hudson is absolutely an outlier. They look like an outlier, so we're going to bank on that being an outlier. But you can see even in other districts like Natick, like Westford, that are a little more similar to us, those first years of the contract are coming in high. We are gearing up to go out very early in an attempt to sort of mitigate some of the impact of this. We think if we go out early, then some of the smaller companies who may not have the bandwidth to work with a lot of districts will be able to bid with us. So that's one opportunity that we see there. I'd also like to get this out before the election. You never know what an election is going to do to fuel costs and bus contracts and things like that. So we're going to do our best to sort of move quickly on this one if we can. Utilities, this is kind of what we're thinking. You see FY23, FY24, our budgeted amount in FY25 fell short of our actuals in FY24. So really all we're looking to do so far in our thinking about FY26 is just bring our budget in line with the actuals from before. We haven't seen a ton of movement here, but we also don't want to be under budget. So it's not a super scientific approach, but it's part of the challenge of budgeting at this time of year. So when we look at everything together, these are sort of our big categories. This is our best guesses as of today, what things are going to look like. Our total salary cost, we've put, includes steps, lanes, COLA. So that's everything together, amounts for a 6% change. That's if everyone who's in the operation right now comes back at the start of next year. That's the cost. Special education, we believe there will be an uptick for 2 reasons. One reason is that out-of-district kind of tuition and transportation, which is the largest part of the special education kind of budget, we think it's going to go up again. If you recall, 2 years ago, it raised by about 14%, last year by about 5%. We're factoring in about another 5% increase. The additional cost there has to do with particulars of our student population right now. We're doing our best to estimate who's going to age out, who's maybe going to come in to needing more services than they have right now. That work is not easy to do with accuracy, but those are the best numbers we have as of today. We'll see where we land. Transportation. You'll notice 15% is higher than many of those folks had in their first year of the contract. That's because our transportation line includes both the big buses and our special education transportation, which includes our out-of-district. So those costs are different and added into the regular costs. It is possible when we negotiate that we might have separate contracts, and if we can have an advantage by doing that, we certainly will. Facilities, that's actually a bigger bucket, including utilities, so that adjustment is not actually for facilities costs as much as it is for that correction in our utilities that we put in. And then all other non-salary, we're really going to flatline if we can. We think we can live with what we've got, and in some cases, we may even be able to reduce some of those numbers. I have asked all the cost center leaders to take a hard look at what they have, try and figure out if there are ways they can reallocate and do some belt tightening here and there. But the reality is those non-salary items are not really the big ticket here. It's again, if you look at kind of where the money is, it's really all about staffing in schools.
Just one quick question. Is there a typo on transportation in terms of the difference between?
There might be. Where is it? Oh, yes, that is a very large typo, isn't it? I'll figure that out and get back to you. Thank you. That should be a 3 then. No, not even a 3.
3.8.
Yeah,
3.8,
it's a
not
3.
4.8.
Yeah. Yes.
That's reassuring. I
yes.
like that was the error and not that it should be 1.9.
Yeah. I mean, we really, it'll be interesting to see, and one reason we need to go out is to get a little more accurate data. My apologies for that's an alarming number. And we're going to hope it's not there. Okay. I wanted to mention, Christy mentioned other accounts, other sources of revenue. I don't have all of them broken down here, but I just wanted to highlight some of the ways that we pay for things outside of local tax dollars. We do have grants that are not sort of one-time grants. They're ongoing grants that help us fund positions, and they are relatively stable. Title I is one, Title IV at IDEA. Title II helps pay for professional development. So there are ways we're really working hard to access money and try and take some of the burden off the municipality. Chapter 70 aid from the state is designed as sort of state aid for schools that comes through the municipal side and helps kind of the town manage resources and hopefully help us make our budget work. Medicaid, there's a school-based Medicaid program that allows us to claim for costs incurred here on the school side. So any services that we provide around that are sort of medical or mental health in nature, sometimes we can claim those and get a reimbursement back to the town, and we do that. Circuit breaker, as I mentioned before, is a state program that reimburses us for the costs, certain costs of out-of-district tuition and transportation. That number, it's about a 75% as of last year. It can be subject to change. So one of the things that's tricky about circuit breaker is that it comes after the fact as a reimbursement. The other thing is that sometimes the state up and changes their mind about what they're going to give us. So it's important to know that too. monies that we bring in that are directed back toward the programs for which we collect them. Tuitions collected for the preschool go back into helping to fund the preschool. Our athletics and activity fees go back toward those programs. They don't really cover those costs, but they help offset those costs. Building use fees help offset the costs of maintenance of our buildings. And then, of course, our community ed program and school lunch programs, they do generate revenue. That revenue can only be used in conjunction with benefits to those very specific programs. I have only a brief overview of where we are on the capital side. I wanted to give an update quickly about work that's happened for FY25, so you know where we are. The high school chiller replacement that was voted last year is complete. We have kind of one remaining little work order on that. Hastings roof replacement is complete. The Hastings ADA project, the first phase is complete. We're currently working with the contractor to set up a schedule to get them in to try and do a little bit of vacation week work during the school year and hopefully close out the rest of that project next summer. There are there's design work in progress for the high school roof section of the roof restoration and rim repairs. And we're doing a really careful look at some of the studies that have been done about our capital needs and taking a hard look, boots on the ground, where the needs are, so we can prioritize carefully and hopefully, only bring up projects that we think really need to get done for you this year, just with, again, an awareness that the town has invested very thoughtfully in the schools, and we want to only ask for that investment when it's really needed. That's it. Well, actually, I got to turn back to Christy, and then we'll do this at the end, but thank you.
So we wanted to talk a little bit about debt. So I have a few slides. This slide is actually the same slide that you saw at the annual town meeting, where we were looking at the debt that we would incur in fiscal 25. And this is compared to our comprehensive fiscal management policies. So we have within our policies a debt service goal of 7% of our general fund debt. And then, our general fund budget, and then with a ceiling of 10% and a floor of 2%. And then what we did for fiscal 25, which we've been doing every year since we started the debt strategy, is using the capital improvement fund money to offset those debt costs. And so we did in fiscal 25, we had estimated using $2.6 million related to the capital improvement fund. The capital improvement fund, again, for folks, I have a future slide on it, but that's all of the revenue that we receive from the Pulte project up at the state hospital. And I'll talk more about that in a couple of slides. This shows our long-term outstanding debt. So this is not all of our debt, it's just our long-term debt. I think one of the things that we've been talking a lot about as we've been talking about different building projects or different purchases is when is debt falling off. So as you look at this slide, you can see the decline of our long-term debt over the next 15 years. So this is one of the data points that we're looking at as we're looking at our long-term capital planning. So some of you might remember that when our former finance director was here, we'd made some presentations about some ideas that we had about how we might structure that long-term capital plan. With her retirement and the transition that we've experienced, we didn't finalize that, and that's something that John and I really hope to do in the coming year. Yeah.
This debt, I think in prior slides, when you've shown something like this, it does not include library, wouldn't include community center, anything kind of going forward. Can you clarify what's in or what's out at a high level?
Yep. So this includes only debt that we have actually borrowed. So this is all of our long-term debt The debt strategy, I'll talk about in just a minute, does not include anything beyond the fail school project. So any borrowing that we did after that fail school project was not included in our debt strategy that we had a great roadshow on in 2020 when we developed it. So I know I've talked to all of you about it. We'll talk a little bit more. So this is our current short-term debt. So this reflects everything that's in short term. We can borrow short term for a period of 10 years. So over time, that rolls into long-term debt. And there are some things on here that are debt experienced by our enterprise funds. So the debt payment from those do come from our enterprise funds, but this is what we're carrying currently for short-term debt. The capital improvement fund, as we just mentioned, that's something that we're using as an offset to debt. So that is all of the revenue. So it's taxes, it's motor vehicle excise, everything that comes from those, from our residents who live in the Del Webb Chauncey property. And so in 2020, when we were looking at funding the fail school project, we were trying to understand how we might use this newly established at the time, the capital improvement fund, to sort of leverage against that project. And so, or all of our debt, but inclusive of that project. And so we developed a strategy where we would take capital improvement fund money and we would attempt to stabilize the debt service payments or the debt budget at that FY 2020 level, which is that $5,661,003 that you see there from fiscal 20. And so every year there's an exercise that's required under the law that was established, the capital improvement fund, where where we estimate what we're going to use against the debt service, and we go through that exercise. Also, part of the debt strategy was that we would leverage short-term borrows and then use any additional funds to do pay downs. So we can do pay downs when we borrow in the short term, not in the long term. Unfortunately, as I mentioned previously, the life to those short-term borrows is about 10 years. So we've started to move some of those short-term borrows into long-term. We've actually seen some favorable rates recently, and so we work with our financial advisor to understand the right time to move some of that debt. The second bullet point there under the debt strategy shows that we're just about at half, maybe a little bit, we're a little more than half, I guess. The revenue that we're receiving into the capital improvement fund is a little more than half of what we anticipated receiving in fiscal 25 when we developed the debt strategy. So a large portion of that is really due to the fact that the project did not move forward as quickly as we had anticipated. So the project is about half built out. So again, we receive a payment every time there's a certificate of occupancy. So if the buildings are not being built as quickly as we anticipated, that's why the funds are lower. And so that's where we're at. So 2.6 is what we estimated in fiscal 25, and the debt strategy we had estimated just over $4 million. The general fund debt, however, is slightly lower than our initial projections, very slightly. So that was really good estimating from both John and Leah Talbot, our former finance director. And so, we continue to work through that. So I know probably the question is, when are we going to see the results of our debt strategy? Because what we had anticipated was that in fiscal 36, I think, that would sort of be the break point where then we would start actually just accumulating funds into that capital improvement fund and then be able to pay for future projects as opposed to just paying debt. We've not completed those estimates based on what's been going on. So some of the things that do influence what that strategy and what that schedule will look like is any additional borrowing that we've done. I think as a town, we actually have done very little additional borrowing since that failed school project. I think we've done some borrowing for some school roof projects, maybe Public Works, I'm trying to remember, but very small amounts compared to the amount of debt that we're carrying. Also, again, the pace of Pulte construction and sales has a big influence. And then again, the length of the short-term borrow and our long-term rates, because once we move to the long-term borrow, that has an impact. And then the last thing I wanted to say about our debt is that we also have over $13 million of authorized and unissued debt. So what that means is this is debt that was approved at town meeting, by town meeting, but we haven't borrowed it yet. And some of that is for projects, that are underway that we haven't needed all of the full amount yet, or ones that are upcoming. So my next couple of slides are just on the capital improvement plan. So I mentioned that we are using debt to develop our long-term capital plan so we can better schedule some of these projects in collaboration with all of the departments. This purely reflects what was requested by departments last year. It's really an illustration of kind of the work that I think we all need to do as we prepare our capital requests. In fiscal 26, we're looking at over $26 million as identified for fiscal 26 last year. In fiscal 28, we're looking at just under $6 million. And so the purpose of me bringing that up, I think, is that we all have work to do to make sure that we are and that's inclusive of the capital planning committee, to make sure that we're really balancing these projects and as we bring them forward, and that we're bringing to the table things that we anticipate in the next 5 years. I mean, a 5-year capital plan, we're required to have that. It's a best practice, and certainly I think a reasonable amount of time to anticipate projects. So in our fiscal management policies, we use about 1 to 1.5% of our general fund operating budget with free cash. In addition to that, we do have debt that we incur through requests in the plan. In fiscal 24, that was about $1.2 to $1.8 million. So you saw my free cash slide earlier that showed that we are using more free cash to fund a lot of these projects as opposed to borrowing. So that was just the general fund. Some of the cost drivers I just want to highlight because there are some really big numbers on there. The satellite fire station was slated for fiscal 26. We'll talk about that in a little bit. The library also slated for fiscal 26 at the time. Again, this was a year ago. The library was holding a spot of 19 million. This does not reflect where they're currently at. I don't know where they're currently at in terms of what that number will be, but this was last year's capital plan. And then the school department had a $1.6 million project, but I think as we just heard from Allison, they're reviewing that as well. So, and then fiscal 26 items that were not in the capital plan. Or this is the recreation center, they're the community center fit out. Oh, and the Mill Pond restoration. So I just wanted to raise that as something, it took me a second to remember, sorry. That was something that was requested in fiscal 26 or 25 that got passed over. And so I'm highlighting that here because the school, I expect, will bring something up in the next couple of years because that was passed over in fiscal 25. And then these are some capital improvement plan drivers requests that we're seeing for the enterprise fund. So again, seeing the request for a higher amount in fiscal 26, and then going forward. And then again, for the enterprise fund, not currently included is renovations to the golf club building. This is a slide with a lot of words on it related to what I just said, which is really that we're really in need of sort of looking at our processes around our 5-year capital plan and then really looking at the way that we plan for a long-range capital outlook. And so that's 2 of the processes that we're working on. We've done a lot of work in the last few years to improve our process. I think all of the departments have done a great job in terms of participating in that process. And so there's just some additional work to be done. I think that's all we have for that agenda item. I have one more slide on building projects, but I think at this point, I know we gave you a lot of information, but if you have questions for myself or Allison, John, happy to take them.
What's our current borrowing rate today in terms of what the market is, John?
Go ahead.
I can't speak to the latest relative to what's been, other towns have been obtaining. I think the last borrow we got was about 3%.
Pretty good. Thanks.
So just a big picture, general question. Somewhere in our goals, we talk about a 2 to 3% increase per year, and we've obviously gone over that considerably the past number of years. Do we need to reset what our goal is, or try harder to get to that lower number?
So that's actually your last agenda item for tonight. So I don't know, I mean, it's up to you all how you want to, what point you want to discuss it, but I think it is safe to say that it's something that needs renewed discussion. Yeah.
I will say, just in my prior community as well as here, I have not seen a school district be able to kind of operate within those parameters well for the last 5 to 6 years. So I think it's just important to keep in mind that that's kind of the lay of the land right now.
Okay. I know that we're going to share our slides and happy to come to a future meeting after you've had a chance to really go through them and digest them and answer questions. I'll just say one more time that we're very early, so that, just this doesn't necessarily reflect what we anticipate asking for fiscal 26. It just reflects trend data and pointing out some things that we see as budget pressures in fiscal 26. So this is my last slide. This is just to talk about building projects. So it's a very simple slide, but really, these are some of the building projects that we've been talking about. So we have the library building project, the community center, the golf club building, and the Harvey building. This is just to answer some of the questions that I've received. Are we paying attention to making sure that we're not duplicating programming in these buildings? The answer is yes. So we have had, I think the spot where we would be most concerned about that duplication would be between the library building project and the community center. And because of that, we have had conversations. We've actually had meetings where we brought both the architects from both of those projects together with both OPMs to really walk through the anticipated use and design of the library project, as well as thinking about what folks are asking for in the community around the community center. And so talk to the library director, and I was part of that meeting, so I was able to see, and I know other folks here are on those committees, but the library really is, because it's a renovation project, is really focused on book lending, library programming, small group study, and then there is one meeting room planned, which is currently what they have. And please correct me if I'm wrong about any of that. I know Sean is here. So, but it really is, I know there was a lot of discussion when they were first talking about a library renovation expansion, about community rooms and additional meeting spaces. That is not what we experienced, I think, currently. And I don't want to speak for them, but I know you'll hear from all of them. But I think that that's important to understand that we've had that conversation. The recreation or the community center will house our recreation and senior center activities. There are classrooms. There's a couple classrooms that we anticipate having in there, as well as potentially an arts and crafts room and other spaces that would be available. the primary use of those spaces would be for programming. They will also likely be used at some points for meetings, but they are not necessarily dedicated meeting spaces. And so, again, I would highly encourage everyone to go over there. I know Jen is already running programs. We held our first senior program there yesterday, and I heard it was a hit. So, and then the golf club building, you know, I know there's folks here from the Municipal Building Committee, but that really is, there was, again, I think when we first started talking about it and we had our golf club reuse committee, there was no community center to talk about. And now there is. So, it's really focused on supporting the golf course through the Golf Pro Shop and the restaurant. And then the Harvey building is exclusively a regional dispatch center. It won't be, you know, accessible to the public. So just to answer some questions about who's responsible for these projects. So we have the building program lead. Some of those are pretty simple for the, certainly for the dispatch center. It's the Metro West Regional Emergency Communications Governing Board. And that is myself, and that is the town administrator in the town of Grafton. And that is established through the intermunicipal agreement that was signed by the select board. And so we are leading that work. Our meetings are public, they're posted. And we have a lot of, even though we're the board, we have a full participation from chiefs, police and fire. And then we have an OPM and an architect, and well, we're working to bring an architect on board for that building. The community center, or the library building project is led by the Library Building Committee. And then the community center is for the programming of that building is led by the select board. I think there's a really important difference between sort of some of these other projects in the community center and even other projects that we've done. The program for a school, certainly I'm sure there's nuances, but it's a school. So there's sort of very basic things that you know you need, similar to a fire station, similar to a town hall, similar to a library. Whereas the community center, we have this building and sort of, you know, there's sort of endless possibilities about what we might have in there. So we know that because we visited other communities that have different departments in there and have different offerings and activities. And so the select board has really committed to that public engagement process that I think many of you have been a part of, and really leading that work to get to a point where we know what the program for that building will be. And that leads us to the design construction oversight. So we have the Library Building Committee again leading the library, Municipal Building Committee is leading the golf building. So at this point, so we had the Golf Building Use Committee. They're the ones who identified the Pro Shop restaurant. And then now it's the Municipal Building Committee is doing the work to decide next steps. And then the Municipal Building Committee, once the program for the community center is completed, will then take on the community center as well. And then again, the Metro West Rec will continue to work through the Harvey building. Funding sources available. So the library building, I put up here general fund debt. We've already borrowed for the beginning of that project. The golf club building the golf club building can be funded through the enterprise fund, the golf club enterprise fund. There was discussion today at the Municipal Building Committee about the need to create a project that can be fully supported by the Golf Club Enterprise Fund. And so that means understanding how large that project can be and what the cost of it can be, but also understanding the future revenue of a new restaurant. So that could be a lease payment, a revenue sharing. There's things that we're just starting to work through. And so that's why you'll see on the warrant a request for funding to go to design, and inclusive of that design would be working with a food service consultant who could really help guide us in understanding what the actual revenue that might be recognized by the restaurant. And then for the community center, we also would be seeking potentially general fund debt, but we also have the sale of the senior center, which is something that we've been talking about since we purchased the building, since we were talking about purchasing the building. that building is assessed for over $1 million. We don't know. We haven't gone out yet to understand. We are required to go out under public bidding laws. So we're required to go out to bid to sell that building. And so we will at some point be able to identify that revenue source or that revenue amount. And then we also have the Pulte stabilization account. Again, we talked about that before. It's specifically set up for capital projects to support seniors and also affordable housing. And so this is a revenue source available to the community center, not available to some of these other projects. And then next steps, the library building is coming to annual town meeting for an article for their renovation construction. There are articles on the fall town meeting warrant for both the community center and the golf club building. At this point, the golf club building funding source would be the enterprise fund. And then the Harvey building, we're getting ready to apply for the next state 911 grant round. I think there were some other ones on the agenda. One was the satellite fire station. So that is in its infancy. The chief has been working really hard to try to identify different locations that might make sense. And he did identify some state land. So the select board supported a letter requesting that be considered by the state. And so we're waiting to hear back. So that's where we're at with that. That is all that I have. So if you have any questions about building projects, I think there's a lot of folks in the room that can probably help me answer those questions. No.
Yeah, that was helpful, Crispy. I guess a question for you. Understanding that one of the largest expenses is insurance in the town. This is really a question for both you and Allison. And understanding the relationship and the insurance, negotiations that happen with the unions, I'm just wondering what options or what opportunities are there to drive down that cost some more that maybe we're not able to take advantage of right now, or foreseeable could see the ability to take advantage of in the future.
I could start and then you can jump in. But I just unplugged because I actually have another slide from previous that shows that we actually, probably take me a minute to pull it up, so I'll just draw it out here.
Air drawing.
So going back, I think to 2010, we've had actually really great relationships with our insurance advisory committee, which is made up of our union leadership, and also is staffed by our health insurance consultant. But that's actually where that $1.1 million amount for our OPEB came from, because in 2015, we had such great negotiations and a shared goal of really reducing those rates that we identified a $1.1 million savings at that time based on some changes that we made in plan design and other things. And so we moved that money towards OPEB. We have made several different changes since then. Most recently, we set up the high deductible plan, which I think more and more folks as they're coming on are moving into that high deductible plan. And so there are several sort of things available. The town reviews that. We review that every year with our health insurance consultant. And we have gone out to bid before if the rates are high. One of the big drivers of that also is our property insurance. Our property insurance rates are, at least for municipalities, are increasing very rapidly. And so that's one other area that we've seen a pretty large increase in the insurance budget. That all being said, so you'll see that, to just give you a little more detail. So we'll start to talk to our health insurance consultants in the fall, and if we, based on sort of the trends in the market, we'll look at we'll look at options with the insurance advisory committee. We've talked about being self-insured. We're currently not, and that's something that we've explored as a potential option in the past as well.
Thank you.
I had one more kind of synergy-related question, and that is, I know the school board and the town have separate budgets, but are there opportunities to share resources, particularly things like facilities, or the one that actually came to mind for me was, we have a procurement officer for the town, and I know the school has their own procurement process. Just seems like that there could be some overlap on something like that.
Do you want to speak to that?
I can answer some of that. We've had that discussion 10 years ago, and we just resurrected the same questions. I think it's very clear that the processes that the school department and functions that we have to meet are totally different and needs from what the town does. And in fact, although there may be synergies and there may be things that we could share, to the extent that we have the staff and the people to do this stuff, I think that's the way the share would go. That other groups, if you will, that have a need, and to the extent that the school department can supply whatever the request is, then obviously that has to do with both the town side of the question as well as the school department. And whether there are synergies, then it's possible that we could share. As I said, that question came up recently, and it's on the table to be discussed.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, we have had just an initial conversation about, I call them efficiencies. Where are there ways that we can drive efficiencies between the school and town? We're very early on in that process. We're looking at possibly a state grant to help us through that process. So more to come in the future, but it's definitely something that's, I think, forefront in our minds.
Is it actually possible for a salaried town employee to contract out to the school for a portion of the work or something like that? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's definitely the ability. So the study that Steve was referring to back in 2010, I think, was talked about combining specific departments, so IT, facilities, and I think human resources. I think one of the things that has been the discussion is really, it could be departments or it could be personnel, but it could also just be specific services that we offer, or it could be, something that the DPW does that also facilities does. So I think we see different levels of opportunity. And as Patrick mentioned, it's something that the state is encouraging through their grant program.
We do already make use of the procurement officer in town, just as a point of reference. And I have seen this work in other communities around services that tend to be contract out. You can actualize a particular savings in those types of areas. So I think Westborough seems to be pretty responsible at bringing the services in-house when they can already. So, but we'll have to look at all the details when they come through.
One of the things to keep in mind on the question is the service that the school department provides is to the students and the teacher and the parents of the town. And to the extent that a demand that isn't that, it would be at a level different than the primary responsibility of the school committee, which is to serve the students and their parents for the purposes of schools. So any issue that comes up that would somehow compete with that need is going to be a difficult thing to deal with. And it can't be shut off. Obviously, the needs of the school department are day-to-day. Payrolls have to be paid based on the union contracts, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and it's not just about maintaining the service itself, it's also maintaining the performance of that service. So, as we look at those opportunities for efficiencies, that's going to be part of the conversation as well, I would imagine.
Andrew.
Thank you. I noticed in the school slide that there was a conversation about utilities, and I know that Fales has been tremendously successful about generating enough energy that we're actually pushing it back into the town. So the two-part question I have is, I was surprised that utilities are still remaining rather steady over time, when I would have thought that some of the, maybe this is just a cost accounting question, there's an opportunity there to see why they're not going down because of the Fales contributions, but also because we want to become a greener town, what are we doing, synergistically speaking, about what we've learned at Fales that could benefit the town and green opportunities and anything else that could help offset some of these more, the higher, transmission charges, electricity charges. Thank you.
I can answer that in some ways. I think if you've looked at your own power bills at home, you notice that, 5 years ago, the cost of electricity, which is the, if you will, the wires business as well as the services rendered, and the energy, you were probably paying 15, 17 cents. If you look at your power bill today, those two pieces add up to be about 32. And so even though Fales is carrying its own, and in fact is earning money for the town, and don't forget that the energy generated, which is, of which some is in excess of our needs, is also heating the building by virtue of the ground source geothermal system. And so the net story at Fales is, in fact, it pays the town to have the services there. So as a follow-up, we haven't forgotten on the school committee that, in fact, even though it's not opportune, if you will, to add solar to existing roofs that are built up and very expensive, there are opportunities to deal with solar on school property in a different way. I think if you have seen some of the school parking lots in other towns, they have, let's say, carports or something very similar to that, which has solar on it. And that would be the venue, I think, that to the extent that we have any other projects that go forward, to consider as part of the construction for that, so that we could very well do the same thing in our existing buildings without having to ruin a roof to do it. So, as we now know, roofs are extremely expensive, and the repair of a roof or the lack thereof has consequences as well. And so it's not as simple, I think, on major municipal buildings to do solar and be effective, but certainly designing a carport or something like that, which not only would make it better for those who use a parking lot in the winter, but certainly would provide energy as well. And so that's in the back of the mind of the school committee in terms of any other further constructions that we might do. And it wouldn't likely cause any problems in terms of the construction effort itself.
One of the things that we're trying to balance is we're currently enrolled, as you've heard from us, into net metering agreements. And so working through what the headroom is in terms of reducing our electricity costs, but still being part of those agreements and owing a certain amount of money to the holder of that contract. So I don't know, John, if you want to speak any more to that.
Sure. Just for clarity's sake, FAIL does not reduce or impact the rates or expenses for other properties in town. They are in a system where the electric company does actually refund excess amounts to us, so they cut us checks, which goes into the general fund as another revenue source. We are contract to net metering credits with other solar properties, so we are in some ways restricted as to what we can do with additional solar growth. The current increase, we're also in a contract, an aggregation contract. So our contract, we started a new contract this past fiscal year, which was part of the reason for the added expense, because our energy cost went from 9 cents to about 12.5 cents. And so that goes through December of 2025, I believe, at which point we'll have to enter into a new contract. But that was one of the things. It wasn't, we took a hard look at our total consumption of electricity, and it wasn't that we were using so much more electricity as it was, like Steve referenced, the sheer cost both of the delivery of the electricity and the electricity itself. And so that's one of the reasons why we hope that we'll see a stabilization of that compared to last year, where we saw people sort of scrambling to cover those costs.
And then beyond just beyond electricity, we do have a sustainability coordinator who works with our sustainability committee to identify different projects. So one of the things that they've worked on has been electric vehicle policy. I'm blanking on other.
Yeah, I was just going to actually
Thank you.
speak to that. So, I mean, one of the other things that we're working on, Steve and I are both on the sustainability committee, and right now we're working on being accepted into the state's Climate Leaders Program. And one of the requirements for the Climate Leaders Program is that we develop a decarbonization roadmap, which is inclusive of all the buildings. Christy mentioned the zero emissions vehicle policy. That's also something that we're working on, and it's actually going to become before the school committee soon to get their piece of it, because that has to be mutually signed between the select board and the school committee. But there's a lot of work being done in that area right now, and our target for Sustainable Westborough right now is to be in the second cohort of the state's program, which would be probably middle of next year. So that decarbonization roadmap needs to be done by then. And Ben Bowers, our sustainability coordinator, is working on that, as Christy mentioned.
Thank you.
Just one last point, because a commercial bill like the G3 rate that we pay for school buildings, and I assume for all buildings in the town, also has what's a sleeper in regards to additional charges. You don't have this charge on your residential rate, but it's called a demand charge. And so for the amount of energy that you use a month, there's a demand in terms of kilowatt hours. So the maximum hour that you have creates the demand charge for the month, and that fee is $13.35 in the most recent bill, which adds up to be quite a bit. And that's how the utilities are getting back payment for the fact that everybody's generating electricity on their own. So it will continue, and it will continue to go up. As a matter of fact, it went up $1 in the last 3 months from what it used to be.
Follow up to that, I guess the solar.
Walter, can you
Walter?
Yeah, I'm right here. Can't get much closer. How long are we committed to those things that are you sort of briefly explained as contracts that we have? Getting that, is that a forever thing, a 10-year thing?
It was a
5-year thing?
20-year agreement starting in 2012. So.
Are they take or pay agreements? In other words, you contract for a certain amount of energy from that source, and whether you use it or you don't, you have to pay the amount?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't know that reference. It's net metering, so we do have to pay a certain amount of money. Yeah, I think so. I think that yes, the answer to that question without knowing all the details of what that.
Because I know from the original agreement that the town had that we're continuing being, or were at least under the old contract, billed separately for whatever the assumption was that the schools would take, in addition to whatever else we take, which was a take or pay, and that's why we were paying for stuff that we didn't get.
No, with the existing solar contracts, it's really just a percent. I mean, we're getting discounted electricity. We get the net metering credits credited to our electric bills. We pay them 80% back. We keep 20%, which essentially results in a lower overall cost. That 20%, because it can't stay with our electric bills, goes into as an other revenue source as well.
Okay. I know I don't have any slides for this part, but I know that there was discussion, or that we wanted discussion around the goal setting. So to what Rod just mentioned, so back in I think 2013, the select board at the time had set a goal of not increasing more than 2%, not including new growth. So that's lower than the threshold for communities that are at a levy, at their levy limit. I showed a slide a while ago, but as you could see, just based on the increases that you've seen in the budget, I don't think that we've ever met that goal. And so there was discussion about sort of having more of a shared conversation about what the goal should be. As I mentioned earlier, other communities are governed. I mean, we also are governed under Proposition 2.5. We just have that excess levy capacity. So when we don't use our excess levy capacity, we are budgeting within that 2.5. I don't know, Walter, if you wanted to lead the discussion or.
Well, I don't know if I'm capable of doing that, but in essence, we've had discussions at the AFC. Obviously, we've had, you pointed out 3 years of sort of 6% sort of increases. And so what can you do, or can you do anything to look at how you get out of that complete cycle? I mean, 5-6 years ago, we had a couple lower numbers, just gone through a big period of inflation, so that certainly doesn't help. But the group as a whole, I think, is looking for ways of setting goals, in the fact that maybe that means we have lots of great ideas to do lots of things, but is there a way, we don't do that this year, we do that next year, we do this next year, we do that, to put off things so that we can get to a more reasonable rate at some point. Personally, I think it's a multi-year effort, but I think you got to start, and this is the point in the conversation where we're just starting to look at it. I don't know if solutions, but it seems like a 4% kind of number is more something you might be able to get to, and that might make us make decisions on what things we want to invest in and when a bit more. I think I tried to summarize, I think, what I thought, but and we've had a couple people come to public forum with ideas along this line as well. So we're just sort of kicking off the idea of since there was a goal previously, should there be a goal, and what would it be if there was?
Right. I think some of the conversation that we've heard is about sort of targeting a specific number in terms of the increase. And so one of the difficulties with that is that, as you can tell, right, the number changes based on revenue, based on value. So I think the percentage was an easier goal to target.
Yeah, I think you have to look at expense, not tax increase, because it's too complicated to do it together. And you also want to be committed to your employees and not making changes there because this revenue's this change or something. But it doesn't eliminate the idea of conceptual goals anyway.
If I may, so there's two other points that I think drive the thinking in this, some of the conversation we've had. One of which is, after 6+ years of doing this, being very forensic about looking at this line, and maybe we don't accept this amendment or this article. It's a fool's game, because you'll never find that $1 million you wanted to save. You won't even find that 100,000 you want to save. So the point of view that we at least bring on the AFC side, and maybe at some of these higher level sides, is very difficult to find those chunks of money. But the counter to that point is, and something that Christy has mentioned, we have phenomenal people that we've employed in this town. Like every person who's leading every department does an amazing job, like in every way possible. And those are the people who might be able to say, what does 95% of my budget look like? And I'm just throwing a number out there. That's just for dramatic effect. So, but what does like funding myself at X percent look like? That, and what would that mean for potential services cut in a way that we, coming in when we do in the process, don't have the opportunity to think about it that way, and to understand where there's flexibility. So I think those are two other elements that I wanted to make sure we consider about when we talk about what does the conversation of driving savings look like potentially.
Yeah. I think this is a worthwhile conversation, but when we talk about what can we put off, part of the reason we had years with lower increases, and part of the reason we've had a significant number of building projects and capital projects more recently is because for many years, maintenance and capital repair projects, school and town, were deferred for that short-term benefit. And deferring maintenance, deferring capital maintenance projects, not maintaining a regular schedule of capital maintenance improvement to the facilities costs more in the long run.
Yes, but the library repair is maintenance. The community center is a new shiny green apple that we can chew on, right? So it's a little, it isn't just putting off repairing roofs. It's
I realize
other
it's
things that are coming up in the master plan beyond even what we've talked about here. I think we have to make some careful choices on. And that's the kind of things I'm thinking of the delay. And I would never espouse not maintaining a building, for sure. I mean, that's short-sighted.
Putting off might not be as accurate as what are there things we don't need to do potentially to at all, because these are value adds that may not be adding the value that is costing us to support. To me, that's a more compelling story than, to your point, deferring maintenance, deferring care, deferring, yeah.
No, I understand the aspect there. The way Walter State was originally
Of course.
phrased, and the majority of the capital plan is capital maintenance and capital repair, or capital replacement to buildings. So definitely looking at new initiatives, new projects, and balancing those costs and the impact against the needs and desires of the community.
Yeah, and particularly adding new services, because adding new employees has a long-term consequence too, as well.
Capital is a pretty easy egg to crack. That's not where the main expense in this town is. I mean, just to be clear.
Right, we saw in Allison's slide, 87% or something is people, and it's similar on the town side.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, that's the big elephant in the room here. If you really want to cut costs, we looked at it on both sides. Our biggest, by far, cost in this town is people. And I think it goes back to this, we can nickel and dime on expenses, or at Alice, I think you even said it, we can go zero on that number, but that doesn't save a ton. So I think it gets down to service. And I think the struggle that we've had is, and they're tough discussions, but we've gone and said, well, what is it as taxpayer? You want to bring down taxes. What is it? What are the services that you don't want? And it's been, tough to get decisions. I mean, it's been tough to, I'll just call out there, cut an admin in the Historical Society because school groups come in and they are hosted there a couple times a month. But, and it's just, we brought it as an example. I mean, just ways to do it, and town meeting, I think, was throwing tomatoes at us. It was kind of one of these things. But I think from a leadership in the town, we need to, if we want to control taxes and control spending, we really have to have probably some tough discussions there as to what that means.
And I think Christie actually corrected me in something I said, and I'm grateful for it, but it was one of those other eye-open moments where I've always struggled with the fact that we talk about level service funding, and I think that means like we're keeping a lot of things the same, and Christie's point to that is, you know, the problem is we call it level service funding, but every year we just add a little bit more, which is why I think asking some of the amazing people that work here about where they see some of those opportunities, and let's be clear, everything doesn't cost the same amount, and some of these benefits are going to be much smaller than others, but carry a cost with them, you know? And I don't know what those are, and honestly, nor would we ever see it, at least at the AFC level, from the way we look at the budgets and the things that are coming up. I think that there's a way to stimulate this conversation at the ground level to say, are there things, you know, maybe we should do?
So a couple thoughts. This is an ignorant question. Maybe I should know this. Does the Finance Committee host public hearings? Not open forum, public hearings? No, okay.
Well, I don't know if we've never done it. I haven't done it since I've
Yeah, I mean,
been
kind of the current, right, okay.
here.
So,
Have to figure out
That's it, you've been here, so, okay, well, not in the last.
okay, so the reason why I ask, I mean, obviously, we do that. We'll have the budget hearing, as Christie put up on the calendar, but that's one meeting. And I think one of the things that I've observed, certainly with the community center, is just one project, even back to the senior needs assessment, is that if we really want to get a sense of what the community wants, and that's community with a capital C and down to little c's, we've got to ask the community. So while I'd love to believe that we're all representative of the community, and it's really a rhetorical question, like, what are we doing to ask the community what they really want? I know I hear a lot of voices, sometimes the same voices, this is what I want, and they're conflicting messages, right? I'm sure I'm seeing nods. So I applaud the question that's being raised, and I'm supportive of having that both at the department level, like, what would it look like? I think that's great, but I don't think we really know what the community wants. I think we bring individual ideas and some of the loudest voices that we are engaged with, but I think if we really want to have this conversation, we've got to ask the community.
You have a slogan that says we're a connected community. I'd love to connect.
I mean, I think Shelby makes a really good point, and it sort of adds on what Ian said, right? The idea that we have to make these tough decisions, but then when we ask people, well, where do you want us to cut services? Nobody's going to say, well, you know what? We probably don't need fire trucks, right? Like, so really, the only way to make those difficult decisions is, I do think you're right, it's asking the directors of these departments, right, to really critically look at their services. But then you have to take that feedback and those suggestions to the community and ask not the 9 of us or the 26 of, you know, to look and say, what do the 20,000 people here paying property taxes think is the most important?
Yeah, and I realize, at least on this side of the table and over there, we're elected, so theoretically, right, you're all appointed, so should we just make those decisions? Are we empowered to make those decisions? Yes. But I will tell you, from being now 7 years into this, like, there are absolutely decisions I look at and say, does that represent all or the majority of Westborough? I mean, I think most of the time it does, which is reflected here. It's reflected at town meeting votes. And that's a whole other conversation. Is town meeting representative, right? We're not going to go down that rabbit hole tonight. But I just think that that's an important part of the conversation, because I don't think sometimes it's fully representative of the whole community, so.
Shelby, I would agree with what you're saying. My struggle here is that you can ask the question one of two ways. What services do you want? What services don't you want? And really it boils down to, what does our community know of all of those services, right? And I'm not trying to say our community isn't involved, but I don't think the average person in our community understands all the services in town, right? I think that would be a broad reach to say that they do. So the challenge with asking that question is, how do you get back? It's, you know, the first thing that flashes to my mind is a study, right? Or a survey type or something like that. But I don't even know if that would bring any value back. So it's a conundrum. I think it's really important that we talk about this more, and maybe we can come up with some ideas on how to do that. But it's a difficult question, no matter which way you ask it.
And in mapping the dollars to the services and the programs, I'll remind the public and everyone here that our budget book, every department is outlining their programs, the data and the metrics by which they're measuring their performance, and the use of those funds. They're setting short-term and long-term goals as far as programs and services. And so, yes, when we look at the budget, we're looking at the tables and the charts, but every line item for every department and every chart has text behind it that explains why and how those dollars are being spent. And so I think we can say, yeah, we can ask department heads to think, you know, are there services we're delivering that are underutilized, where there's an economy there, right? And we can look at the programs and say, is this program a priority? Is it less? We then have to check to make sure it's not something that's required by law, federal or state, right? We've learned, I mean, a lot of the impetus for the wastewater fund was the fact that there's increasing regulations on stormwater management, and we have to manage and plan for those costs, both operational and capital, in bringing those decisions. But I also think that we also have to be careful as we do that analysis, knowing that deciding to cut services can't just be guided by what the majority wants. You also have to reflect to what the community needs, even if it's a minority in the community, a minority percentage of the community, that those services might still be critical to the overall health and well-being of the town and the community and our population and our businesses as a whole.
Being one that was here at the beginning when we set that 2% policy on the select board, I think these are the discussions we had then, and we struggled to say, what can we do? And we said, okay, what would happen if we were at, as we had been probably 20 years ago now, that we were basically at our excess levy capacity. So we were within a few $100s of actually having to go to a Prop 2.5 override. And I think we looked at it and said, okay, what can we do to, you know, kind of control that so we don't have that happen? And we set a number, we set it below 2.5. And Christy's, correct me if I'm where I go astray here, but it goes back to a lot of what we're talking about here in the sense that we said we're going to set a policy, but we're not, the 20 so of us here are, you know, not going to make all those decisions. It's got to be using the, you know, the intelligence that we have in our departments to say, okay, if we're here and we're going up 3.5%, let's work together and figure out how do we get it to 2.5. Now, 2.5, you know, as we look at these numbers, you know, I think we were okay towards the beginning there, but we, you know, especially we had that spike in 19. We've been spiking the last few years, but, you know, is there another number that we get comfortable with? I don't know. Is it? But I think from a policy standpoint, it's got to be something that then people can work towards versus just, I think, you know, arbitrarily saying, you know, it sounds like an idea, but we tried this one too. Said, okay, everyone's going to cut 1% or 2%. And then we were, you know, we have departments that have 1 or 2 people and said, okay, if I cut 2%, I'm either cutting their salaries or I'm getting rid of a person because they don't have anything else to cut, you know? And so it's, you know, I think trying to take it down to each department level is difficult, but I don't have an answer here. It's kind of just giving a history of how we did it before, but trying to think some way like that sets a policy that then we bring to the town and say, this is the policy we have, this is what we're trying to do. And again, at the end of the day, if the town votes to go up 10%, the town votes to go up 10%. We don't, I think we can control what we want to bring to them, but they can always change it and say, I want to add more,
And just sort of a reminder, clarification that the policy is 2% in addition to growth, right? So COVID, post-COVID, there's been a spike in real estate values that has increased our growth.
The policy was actually not including.
excluding.
Oh, it's excluding
It
growth.
was, yeah.
So maybe that's a change.
Okay.
But maybe that's a change. Maybe
Yeah.
it's, I don't get it thrown, maybe it's 2.5% including new growth. I don't know.
Well, maybe that's just the reality of the conversation, is deciding what is the appropriate metric, right? Maybe it's not an issue of the increase, but rather of how we perceive and how we look at the increase, right? And I'm not arguing one way or the other. Maybe it is dramatically too high and we should cut spending. Maybe it's not, but either way, it might be a question of how we evaluate it. If we're consistently missing it, though, I mean, to the point, if we say this is our goal and we miss it every year, then we should reevaluate. Maybe it's just an unreasonable goal.
By similar token, we could make our goal every year if we changed it 12 to 15% growth, and we've been killing it. We're just way ahead of. But that, I think moving the benchmark isn't the goal here. I think the goal is like real value, and I think value touches on so many different things. Do we know what people want? Do we know what people need? Are we connected? Are we finding out what people want? I think there's a lot of opportunity to get more, but if we just agree that it's just so hard, then all we got is thoughts and prayers, and we're going to bring 7%, and they're going to vote on 7%. So I think the conversation to get that thinking and moving in a direction where we are disciplined to talk about what we may not need would be a win.
I do think it would be a worthwhile exercise to understand what bigger percent, 1%, 2%, 0.5%, what that would look like, what the impact is on the taxpayer, and what does that really feel like from a service level perspective? Because I think Patrick makes a good point that, I mean, no one wants the fire department or the police department's response time to be delayed because we got pick the number, $12 savings in our average single, I'm not signing up for that. I'll never support that, right? So people have to really understand what pain are they willing to accept as part of this? And some of it they'll never feel because they don't go to the library, right? They've never had to call for emergency services, but I think Alan also makes a good point of we also have to be very much aware of the silent majority or minority, I'm not sure, who won't engage and won't speak up or can't or what have you, and we have to also understand that as part of the calculation. But I do think it would be worthwhile to understand what does that look like in a as quantitative way and unemotional way as we can look at it.
One of the issues that we brought up earlier, which was level service, what does that mean for schools? What it means for schools in a bigger sense is simply that, in fact, we deliver at least the same quality of education next year as we have this year or the year before. And so if you look at the mechanics of the school budget, 85% of the school budget is based on labor costs. Every year or in every 3-year cycle, we negotiate labor contracts. In the last few years, inflation has killed us. And in fact, there's an expectation by employees, not only here, but for Boeing and for other places in the United States, where in fact they would like to get paid enough so they can at least live the same as they did 5 years ago, irrespective of the value of the dollar. So the bottom line for the school department is how well can we do providing level service, that is the same number of employees doing the same thing, when you have labor contract settlements that are going to be higher than the 2.5% limit that we have from the state. And we're obviously part of those increases that you've seen in the tables here.
Well, and so fully understand that.
So just let me finish.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were done.
There are mechanics to what we're talking about here that are drivers for how you do this. And in fact, the only way you actually will impact, at least say, the school budget, is to do something different and less expensive. That's pretty hard to do. So in each department, each part of the government, you have to figure out the mechanics of the drivers to then be able to have an intelligent conversation as to what you can save. You can't do it any other way. Many of us have been in this business for a long time. And I think Ian hit the nail on the head. People don't want to give up what they have. They just don't want to spend as much. And in fact, no one's ever going to say, I don't want that kid to graduate because he cost me $20,000 a year. So put him somewhere else. That's never going to happen. And in fact, for anybody that says something similar, I guess, in the services that you deliver in any of your departments, God help us. So it's very hard to do, and you have to understand the mechanics of your own budget to figure out how you can manage anything. So just wishing to have 2% or wishing to have 5% isn't how it's going to get done.
So one thought I've always had with at least the town side, and I don't know whether this is legal or even the right thing to do, but the thing that struck me is we have a zillion little, not little, they're big, but budgets. And when you're not allowed to overspend a budget, it by definition means you have to pretty much have extra % or 2 or something, because it's pretty impossible to exactly predict a number, and you can't go above, right? So you got to be below. And whether there's a mechanism where they're somehow combined so that you don't need every budget with, say, this 2% extra in it. So that you can, because years people come and go and change and different. And when you look at our report at the end of the year of all the things, there's some budgets that are kind of well under and some over. But we yet predicted a certain number at the beginning. And so it's a nice, people love having that control on each salary and wage line and all this stuff, but is there some other process that gets you a result that might have 5% less overall or something?
I just want to clarify. So the way that we budget for salary and wages is we take the existing employee and we add the COLA and the steps. So we actually budget exactly, which can be challenging to recruitment if someone leaves. And then, as Steve just mentioned, I mean, the market for any position out there it's just really difficult to get people in positions. But the way that we budget is to the penny for salary and wages. And when we look at when we meet with department heads and we look at their requests for upcoming budgets, we look at what they've expended. So, I mean, it's fair point that, some things are really hard to budget, like overtime, for an example, is difficult, but, we budget based on historical use. So we've never had the conversation to have a little bit more just in case. I mean, that's really what we look to the reserve fund, the Finance Committee reserve fund for, so.
And we do, when departments have savings and other departments have costs that are higher than expected, we do interdepartmental transfers. And so we do move. And the problem is if you say, well, there is no padding per se, it's best estimate, right? And our estimates on revenue are conservative, our estimates on spending are conservative because if in the aggregate you under budget, that's what you set the levy at. And if you, on the aggregate under budget, you run out of money before the end of the fiscal year. Unless you go back.
That's my point. You have to, essentially, you have to be here, not here, because you can't go over, right?
Right, but so, yes, there's always yes, that we, in certain accounts that come in under budget, you look in hindsight and say, gee, they could have cut a couple $1,000s off their budget, we would have been fine. But if you do that too greatly, and you end up under budgeting in the aggregate, the total, where interdepartmental transfers can't fix it, then you're going to have to call a special town meeting to raise and appropriate, because you've run out of money.
We have, I mean, in addition to interdepartmental transfers, we also use the town meetings to what you were just saying. And you know that all because you've seen those articles. So we can make adjustments like we are with the FY25 fire contract at the October town meeting, and then any further adjustment would come as a free cash article at the annual town meeting. So we are constantly reviewing those budgets. I already said it. We don't have those conversations of what about the just in case money. That's really the AFC reserve fund. So
I'd like to segue slightly off of what Walter said, and some of this has to do with a select board goal or requirement, and that is the free cash. The goal is to use 1 to 1.5% towards capital projects. And I realize that helps because we don't have to borrow money, so it's a fiscally sound thing to do. However, if we were to take that 1.5% and give it back to the taxpayer, that would reduce, I mean, that's part of, through free cash. In other words, the taxpayers, in my mind, are giving more money, or we're getting more revenue than they anticipated. Why can't that go back to reduce taxes as opposed to a free cash article on the next town meeting? And I have a follow-up to that, and that is, what can we do to encourage the school board to generate free cash? I mean, there's a feeling out there that whatever the budget is given to the school board, they're going to spend all of it. And last year they did up to $545. Is there a mechanism where we can encourage savings during the year? You have the money there, but you get more grants or whatever. Is there a way that we as a town can encourage more free cash that could go lower our taxes?
Well, just to point out one of the facts that was on one of the sheets that was shown, and that is $11 million plus or minus Chapter 70 money comes back to the town every year. It's created by the schools. It's a refund from the state. And guess how much that turns out to be? It's $11 million that we put into free cash from Chapter 70 money, plus another 2 or 3 from the reserves excess, if you will. That's how that thing gets built. So I would say you already get it back from the school committee that way.
It doesn't generate, Chapter 70 is used to reduce what we anticipate the levy to be. So it's used like any other revenue. It doesn't generate free cash because we anticipate it as a revenue. I think what Rod is talking about is unexpended budget, right?
Right.
Because that plays to free cash. I'm not going to answer that question. That's for you. But the question about the free cash, I mean, I'll be a broken record because I know I've said it many times, but using free cash for one-time expenses is a best practice. It's not just a policy of the select board, it is a best practice across the country. And we are seeing, and I think we are seeing in other districts and in other communities, people who use, I mean, I was just at a conference, it was an international conference, and folks are talking about, oh no, we don't have ARPA anymore. Like now all of our taxes are going up. Well, that's because they used one-time revenues to cover operating expenses. And so if we're deferring maintenance or deferring purchasing equipment, then that's an issue that I think Ian raised earlier, or one of you. And just giving that back not only creates the structural deficit, but then you defer maintenance down the road, or in the alternative, you're giving money back, so you're depleting a revenue source. And then at some point, I mean, a couple years ago, I think I showed warrant articles or warrants from other communities. They don't buy a fire truck with free cash. It's a raise and appropriate. And if you need that fire truck, it's going to impact taxes in that year. Same with police cars and all the other things. I think we're in a very good place that we're able to purchase one-time expenses. I think we've shown some fiscal responsibility in terms of using more free cash so that we are offsetting potential borrows or other things. But you've heard me say all that before.
It's interesting where you were headed. I mean, what you were talking to is almost like a town refund, right? Like a tax refund, right? From free cash. I essentially think of what Christy was just describing as that refund. The following year, the town's going to come and ask for new police cruisers. They're going to ask for a new ambulance. They're going to ask for whatever. And if that can be paid for using free cash, essentially you're preventing that hit on the tax bill, giving essentially that refund to the taxpayer. So that is, I think, the mechanism that is occurring. Doesn't go directly to my bank account or your account, but it does because we're saving that money.
I guess my only argument is it seems like it's easier to pass things when it's free cash versus borrowing. Maybe we need a higher level of scrutiny.
I don't know the last time the town voted down an ambulance or a police cruiser, right?
Well, we're going to extremes here,
Yeah.
right? So stocking Sander Pond versus a police cruiser. I mean, there's things all in between.
Yeah.
Condensation.
Maybe kind of a point of consideration as you're batting this around. So Chapter 70, we could do a deep dive on that at some point if you want. It's getting a little late, probably. It does establish foundation budget and a foundation spending notion for schools, school districts, and really sets a requirement for district contribution. And Chapter 78, comes to schools that actually meet that requirement. I just want to note, when we look back at sort of Chapter 70 numbers from FY24 to FY25, the spending change required between those years under the Chapter 70 formulation was 5.68%. That's what the state's telling us we had to increase. Now, we are well below the threshold we need to be here. We're meeting our obligations. But just to give you a sense of the inflationary climate that's out there among school districts, that's what folks are being told should be happening at schools. And I think it's just really important to know where that comes from. It's real services for kids, and as I said right at the get-go, those services are not reducing right now. People are working incredibly hard. I think we are in a place where we're starting to kind of get back to a sense of normalcy, but by the same token, we have a lot of work left to do, and I would just be cautious. Under-investing in schools, as I showed you in the slide, you saw, I hope no one from Belmont is watching right now, but you saw the slide about Belmont. They do have a kind of low number of students in their special education programming in district. They're bleeding out resources out of district. So kind of a failure to invest in the people in district can actually cost you more pretty quickly if the programs start to fall apart. So I want to be really clear about that. Now, we do a lot of other things aside from special education, but a lot of those things are things people care about greatly. And so I just would be cautious. We do want to make sure we're transparent, that we're using our dollars appropriately. If we have an opportunity to reallocate instead of adding, we are 100% going to do it this year. And I've sent that message loud and clear to department heads at the school side. And I hope we'll be able to reflect that back to you when we bring forward a more robust budget. But, at the end of the day, one of the hard things about budgets in schools is at the end of the day, the people who are impacted the most are people who can't vote because they're too young. So it's sort of our responsibility to look out for them. Sorry, a little soapboxy there.
Allison, can I ask you a question? The proposed ballot question on MCAS, and if that passes, I've always forget if it's yes, no, but meaning it goes away. That if it were to go away as a graduation requirement, have you started those conversations about what sort of service impact that, or what surplus or anything that might create?
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, I want to clarify, MCAS doesn't disappear because of the ballot question. Okay. The graduation requirement disappears, but not the testing requirement. There's been no substantive change in the kind of testing administration battery.
I haven't read the ballot question, but.
Yeah, the ballot question's a little bit confusing, and I'm not going to weigh in one way or the other. Voters could decide about that. But in terms of the number of tests, the frequency of tests, kind of the obligation of schools to respond to test results, really the only kind of thing at stake around this question is, should it count toward graduation? So,
thank you.
You're welcome.
Hopefully, we're near the end. I'd like to summarize, I guess, even though the process that we go through is very difficult to get where we get in serving the town meeting and serving the population of the town, but we do, as a state, have a requirement to have a balanced budget. Just to think about, Illinois has a $55 billion shortfall that they carry every year, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger because they don't balance their budget. So I think we're a lot better off than many other places are.
I guess we'll just see if there's any further questions or comments.
I just wanted to thank you all for presentations. I think we asked for a little more substantive discussion and information this year than in past, and I think we've gotten some more. And I think it's a work in progress to continue to do that, because as you say, we're very early, but it's good to get the topics going, and I think. Appreciate the effort that you put in, even though it is very early.
Yeah, and I would echo for the select board. I think we really appreciate the efforts of both the school and the town, the work putting into tonight and presenting, and we know it's so early on. So thank you very much. With that said, I'll take a motion to adjourn the select board.
Moved. Second.
All those in favor?
Somebody want to make a motion for us?
Have fun,
Motion to adjourn the Advisory Finance Committee.
Second, all in favor?
13 million locked in for 13 million.
So much.